My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elane O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days, I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology. Hey listeners, so this conversation turned into maybe the first of a few conversations on this topic. It did kind of ramble a little. As we get into this, there will be more conversations to follow. Here we go. So we are enjoying a Boulevardier.
Okay, I'm not enjoying anything yet.
Why not?
Because I haven't had it.
You're getting behind.
I know, I'm sorry. All right, go ahead.
Feel free to go ahead and have a sip.
All right, thank you.
So I don't know if it's Boulevardier or Boulevardier. I go between the two. But it's delicious.
It is delicious.
It's another bourbon-based cocktail. It's somewhat similar to a Negroni, at least in the idea, right?
Okay.
So it's 3 equal ingredients, equal parts, bourbon, Aperol, and sweet vermouth.
If you were using, say, Campari instead of Aperol, or you're using a softer bourbon as opposed to blah, 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 would you adapt proportions? Okay.
Probably,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I tend to, and I even did, in making this one, I did back off the Aperol just a little bit.
Okay.
And bumped up the bourbon just a little bit, because I know that's the way we like our cocktails.
Okay. Cool.
But it's very tasty.
It is very tasty.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
All right, I'm ready to talk.
Are you?
Yeah.
You have things to say?
Well, not yet, because I don't know what we're talking about. Although I do always have things to say, ask anyone, so.
All right, well, here's what we're talking about.
All right,
so this is going to sound a little insulting, but this is the question. This is a very popular question on Google. The question is this: can you be smart and be a Christian?
Ooh.
Okay. Now let me let me.
You don't have to back off it, man.
It's a good
question.
I'm not backing off, but I am clarifying.
Okay.
What I mean by that, there are plenty of smart people who identify as Christians, right? The question really that I'm posing is, why are so many Christians reluctant to engage their intellect, use their brain in matters of faith?
Oh, okay. That is a very different question.
Right. And that does spill over into worldview, right? So then it's also going to involve, like, why don't they use their brain when it comes to politics or science or other issues that may be faith adjacent, but not exactly faith. So it's not limited to just what do they believe about the Bible, because I can't say think. Right. Feel or believe about the Bible or about God or about Jesus or any of those things, but it also spills over into the whole worldview.
Right.
Why are Christians reluctant to use their brains? Now, I can address this from a personal standpoint. I have for years now told people that before you and I started working together and before I was kind of under your teaching.
So, BE.
BE, that's right, before Elane. I would say that I engaged my faith spiritually and emotionally, but not so much intellectually.
Okay.
And when I started engaging my faith intellectually, it changed a lot for me.
Right.
Because, I mean, I'm a pretty smart guy.
Yes, you are.
And so when I started applying, logic, common sense, maybe, but more like when I started reading in my experience, my firsthand experience, and my observations, I guess, about just life, nature, the way things work, to my faith, it actually brought my faith to life in some new and exciting ways for me.
Yes.
When you fall into sort of that rhythm of just emotionally and spiritually responding to God, but not engaging your brain, it gets really, boring. And it gets really like, there's no challenge to any of this. There's no growth. There's no evolution, because to evolve is scary. Right. Because then you may be posing questions that, are uncomfortable questions.
Right.
So that's the question. Why are so many Christians, smart people otherwise in some cases, unwilling to use their brains when it comes to their faith or matters that are faith adjacent?
Wow. Okay, first of all, I have to say that I have always admired, coveted even, your, I don't want to say natural, although I do think it's partly natural, but I think it's a lot trained, your emotional and spiritual connection to God. Oh, okay. Partly that's who you are, but I think it is partly because of the way you were reared in terms of how one relates to God.
Yes, right.
And there's good in that. Mm-hmm. The bad in that is when you are limited to that.
Right.
Similarly, I would say, on a different end of the spectrum, whether you're an atheist or a liberal Christian, the idea that you relate to God first through intellect, if you don't connect to God, then you're more of an atheist. You know what I mean? It's like, that has its drawbacks.
It does.
So the question is more like, for me, the question you're asking is partly like, how do you become an integrated human being?
Yeah.
Right. So it becomes kind of a humanist question, and I'm sorry to say that, but I did want to address the Google question, though. So I have to tell you, there have been conflicting studies about this.
Okay.
So some studies have shown that IQ actually is not connected to religious adherence per se.
Okay.
It tends to be more connected to culture, to training, to whether you've got enough food, all of those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then the other side is that religious people tend to have lower IQs. Mm-hmm. There's the whole cause and correlation problem.
Okay, yeah.
Right? What would be interesting is to find some kind of study that correlated, and I'm sure they're out there, I just haven't looked them up, that correlated religious fervency of any stripe with class, food availability, medical availability, and so forth, rather than seeing those as separate things. Because as we know, at least in this country, that often that kind of fervency that we're talking about is associated with all kinds of other situational realities.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Let's just kind of take that and say, yeah, so go find whatever scientific article you want and read the difference between causation and correlation. Mm-hmm. Okay. So going back to the more interesting question, yeah. How do you become an integrated person? Or why is it that people seem to not use their normal critical thinking faculties when they're talking about Christian faith particularly?
Yeah.
I would ask the same question about why they don't use their critical faculties when they're talking about their favorite football team.
Okay.
I think there's something about tribalism.
Yes.
That is very important to human beings.
Yeah.
Not even in the negative sense, but just the desire to belong. You've talked to me about how, coming to deal with being gay and Christian, all those things, that your concern wasn't so much about God, but about losing church and all those other things, losing community.
Yes, right.
Yeah. From what I've observed in human beings, that's really the concern. So it's like, how much of my normal daily life will I lose? And most of us don't ever actually think about that unless we're going through some kind of particular trauma that we have to decide about.
Yeah.
But it's this kind of gut level, deep loss concern.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. I think there's also just the tremendous amount of training that has happened since the fundamentals were written at the beginning of the 20th century that tells us that either we can believe in evolution or we can believe in God. And that didn't exist before the fundamentals were written. And it's because people were freaking out about losing their grip on people.
Yes.
It's unfortunate, right? Because that's not a question God has ever asked us to,
Right.
Like there is nowhere in the Bible where it says, be stupid, follow me.
Be
right?
dumb.
Be dumb. Stop thinking. In fact, Jesus encourages people to think.
Yes.
Think about this. Think about that. What do you see? Blah, 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 blah.
Well, anyway. Right. Because if Jesus didn't want us to engage our brains, then he wouldn't have taught in parables.
Right. Yeah, the whole point of a parable is not to create an allegory, but to get you to think about a problem.
Think about,
right?
Right.
So yeah, I think God values thinking, right? And if you watch Jesus is a thoughtful person, and you watch somebody like Peter in the Bible, and you see him evolve. Same with Saul/Paul, right? Saul/Paul, his personality stays the same, but his thinking evolves.
It does.
So we're not discouraged from thinking.
Right.
When you are discouraged from thinking about anything, it doesn't matter what it is, that's not about any particular religion per se, or culture per se, or country per se. It's about the desire to control your mind.
Yes.
And the way you think.
Yeah.
So if you've come up with this idea that the Bible is, I don't like to say literally true, because that's not a helpful way of putting it, but is flat, right? If you've come up with the idea that the Bible is flat, then anything that challenges that view of the Bible is scary.
Yeah.
Or authority, right? If you've come up thinking that your mother is the arbiter of all things true, and to go against her is to somehow really stray both from her love and from your community. And yes, I'm sorry to my kid. Can you imagine? That's going to be terrifying to do that.
Yeah.
So I think about one of our friends who is a very bright person, who is a scientist, and also trying to make sense out of the way that they were raised to think, and the knowledge they have of science, and trying to make sense out of that, and just how hard that is. So I think the question is more like those of us of any way of thinking about the world, whether it's religious or scientific or anything, or cultural or anything. Racism is the same thing, right? Any of us with any way of thinking about the world that limits our questioning that way of thinking are in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? And I realize that's a really esoteric way of putting it. but I think it's really an important understanding. So if I were the kind of person who believed that strawberries had to be red, and I were a gardener, and I unknowingly planted a plant where the strawberries weren't red and they came up orange, I'd be saying, this isn't a strawberry, or it can't be in my garden.
Yeah.
And that's how people are, I think. I don't know. What are you thinking about all of this?
Well, I mean, I know people who are deep believers in God and in Jesus. They love Jesus, and they're prayerful, and they're generous, and they're I want to be more like that. And they also seem to very, I don't want to say blindly, but kind of automatically fall into the same rhythm all the time. And it's like because they don't ever think about why it is that things are the way they are, or why it is that God is the way God is, or there are never any questions. And I think when I was a kid, I just saw that as being unwavering, right?
Yeah.
And my Aunt Frances was one of those very unwavering people whose faith I admired a great deal. And I think those people aren't wrong. But I also think that when we face certain challenges in our lives, sometimes our reality bumps into what we've always been taught.
The wall basically runs into the wall.
Or what we've been programmed to believe about certain things.
Yep.
As a parent, your kid comes out to you as gay, or you lose someone you love. in a accident, tragically, suddenly.
Right.
And you start to question why, either why God would allow that to happen.
Right.
Or, but I love my kid and my kid is good. And
how could this be?
How could this be terrible? Like, how can I view my kid as an abomination? Those kinds of questions, right?
Yeah.
Those kinds of questions and running into the wall. And I think that if we don't engage our brains, if we do run into a wall, and most of us at some point in our lives we do, how do you confront that?
Right.
How do you get through that?
Right.
Because sometimes the platitudes, and I don't mean that in a diminishing way, but the things that we tell ourselves to get through the day sometimes aren't enough.
Right.
Reading the Daily Bread in the morning while I'm drinking my coffee like my Aunt Frances did, while that's sweet and earnest, sometimes you just want to pick up the book and throw it against the wall because it's like, what? I've read this my whole life and this is not helping.
Right.
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 And I think that's why a lot of people end up deconstructing, because they start working at the things that no longer fit, and then they're ended. It's like unraveling the sweater, and you have a pile of threads, and then you got to figure out what to do with all these threads.
Right.
I think there is that balance of holding on to what you know to be true, but also being willing to accept that things may not be exactly the way you see them, or there may be more to it than what you can see.
I'm wondering, as you're talking about this, how much of it is being reared in an environment that is afraid of change.
Yeah.
Because change always entails grief. It's one of the things in my paid gig that I talk about in change management is change always involves grief. Yeah. Now, it can be brief, it can be long, but it always involves grief. If you're afraid of change, if changes that have some magnitude really disrupt who you are, then you're going to be far more likely to reconstruct your reality around your understanding of the world that doesn't require you to change than you are to face another reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Kid coming out as gay. If you've been taught, and if you believe, that means act on what you think or act on something inside you. If you believe that being gay is an abomination, which then makes it bad in God's eyes, that's a series of beliefs, by the way, and your beloved child comes out as gay, you got to do some real kind of dancing to try and deal with that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people experience it as, where is my loyalty? But it's not about that, right? It's about how able we are to expand our idea of what reality contains.
Yeah.
Right? And that's hard. It's painful.
It is.
I don't blame people who have a challenge with that per se. I do blame them when their challenge with that impinges upon other people's life in the world.
Right.
Their life-givingness in the world.
Right.
So I don't think it's so much that Christians per se are not exercising their intellects, right? I would say anybody who has a particular worldview that does not allow for change will be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making any sense right now, because it's like, it's such an interesting and big topic that I'm kind of like, ooh, and then we could talk about,
Yeah. No, but, this touches on a whole lot of things.
Right. But it's not about intellect. Okay, I really want to be really clear about that. It's not about intellect, and it's not about good-spiritedness. It's about the way you frame the world and how hard it is to be the kind of person whose world can expand without dumping a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
It's the both and. Both and is hard. It takes work.
Yeah.
And so both being a person who has experienced or wants to experience something beyond the material reality and somebody who pays attention to material reality, it takes work. And a lot of us don't have room for that kind of work in our lives because we're just living.
It's true.
Does that help at all?
I think so. I mean, I think it's the beginning of a conversation, right?
Listeners!
Listeners, we love hearing from you. CocktailTheology.com is where we are. Until next time.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.